It's the first time in 10 years.
Yeah, graduation handle is the first time in my life.
Okay. Good morning, colleagues and esteemed guests, both in-house at SAIAB and online. Thank you for joining us this morning. I have the privilege of introducing our speaker this morning, Dr. Taryn Murray. She's been very generous with her time this year. This is her second talk out of a total of 5 presentations that have been given in the series. So thank you for that. This talk is based on a recent presentation that Taryn gave of 20 years of estuarine research that was initiated by Professor Paul Cowley and his team in collaboration with Norwegian colleagues. And it has resulted in the training of a number of students and several outputs. Taryn has been responsible for wrapping up the program in the past couple of years with Paul's retirement. It's been a highly fruitful collaboration, and one with plenty good outcomes. And it's arguably served as a stepping stone in the setting up of the current incredible network that we have, the ATAP, which is the Acoustic Tracking Array Platform in South African waters. And with that, I'll hand over to Taryn. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for being here this morning. Hopefully I won't take up too much of your time because I seem to do that a lot. So yeah, this talk, as Matt mentioned, is really just a presentation that I presented while in Oslo at the Sand Ocean Concluding Conference. And I was just one of several team members that were very fortunate to attend. So how did the collaboration really start? We took 2 researchers, one South African, one Norwegian, and we threw some fish into the mix. And the thought of the fish species was to largely focus on estuary dependent species and why these specific species. Well, all of them generally have a typical life history. So they use the estuaries as nursery areas with adults generally spawning at sea. The tiny little early juveniles recruit back into the estuaries where the juveniles stick around for 1 to 3 years and then slowly begin to make their way back out. And so the life cycle continues. The nice thing or not so nice thing about these species is that many of them are really in a bad state. Their stocks are either completely collapsed or heavily overexploited. For example, the dusky cob is currently sitting at about 2%, 1.5 to 4% of their current biomass or what used to be available. So if you think of it in terms of percentages or 100 fish, you've got 100 fish overall, there are only about 2 fish left. So this really paints the dire situation that these animals are in. So this project went through several phases. There's quite a long collaboration of South African, Norwegian collaboration and funding, joint funding. Phase 1 saw work and was essentially the start of the estuary telemetry work in South Africa, where one study was set up in the Great Fish Estuary, which is down the road in the Eastern Cape, and it was focusing on 2 species, dusky cob and spotted grunter. But it really provided the first estuary study that looked at quite a couple of individuals from 2 species, but still only 1 estuary. And there were some really nice outputs related to this work. Amber and Warren were very involved in this, and Amber actually did her MSc on spotted grunter from this work. So some really great outputs, which really set or opened the door for estuary telemetry work in South Africa. Into phase 2, we introduced a couple more species into the mix and expanded this to a couple more estuaries. So we're now looking at quite a couple of individuals of a couple of species over a couple of estuaries. So we're really learning more about the movements of these individuals in different estuaries, as well as coastal areas. Into phase 3 of the project, and this for this component, we thought that we should really focus on the migration ecology of these species. So we had a good understanding of what the juveniles were doing in the estuaries, and most of the work that had previously been conducted was on smaller individuals. But now we're like, what are the big ones doing? You know, it'll be a better, it'll be more beneficial to look at the movements of these large adults predominantly. So what are they doing? Are they moving up and down the coastline? Are they spawning in certain areas? And through this work, and in collaboration with the Canadian-based Ocean Tracking Network, this really opened the door for the establishment of the acoustic tracking array platform, which is all the receivers that you currently see positioned. So what started as a single estuary has really spread out across the entire coastline. And this was really the brainchild of Paul Cowley. So he must be very much be acknowledged for all his hard work in getting this network up and running. Finally, phase 4, we had a whole bunch of fish species, but this time we threw some people and some money into the mix. And this really brings us to the presentation that I want to give to you today. So our project was entitled Benchmarking Knowledge-Based Adaptive Management of Estuarine Fisheries in South Africa for Sustainable Development. So quite a mouthful, but hopefully by the end of it, we'll have broken it down a little bit better. Our team was made up primarily of researchers from 3 institutes, namely the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity, NINA, which is the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research, and then several collaborators from the Nelson Mandela University. The people that you see on the screen were the people that were responsible for the compilation of the final overarching report, but there were many, many, many students that were very involved in this work. In terms of background, South Africa has approximately 300 estuaries of varying functionality along about 3,000 kilometers of coastline. And these estuaries are exceptionally productive systems and provide excellent fishery opportunities for subsistence, small scale, and recreational fisheries, and are very important for income generation and food security. But as I mentioned, many of the species that are actively targeted are overexploited or collapsed. So this really threatens the livelihood of several individuals that rely on these resources. So this collaboration has been ongoing with the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research since 2001. So we're looking at 20 years of collaborative research, which primarily focused on fish movement using acoustic telemetry. But despite the mountains of incredible information that has been produced from all of this work, there's been relatively little uptake of this information by the management authorities. So there's a growing increased recognition for implementation of sustainable development or ecosystem approach to fisheries initiatives, but all of these ventures require information on the social, the economic, and the ecological components or aspects of fisheries. And this is an approach that this project really tried to focus on. So the overall aim of the entire project was to develop recommendations for knowledge-based governance of estuarine fisheries in South Africa. So how better can we manage our fish species and the estuaries themselves in order to promote sustainable estuarine fisheries? The overarching aim was to really try and develop key findings and recommendations that would guide people involved in setting up the regulations, the guys involved in making the decisions. So this is where we wanted to feed in, and that's all the work that was done will hopefully work towards that. And in countries that have similar socio-economic settings, these recommendations could be applied to them as well. So what have we done? In terms of fishery resources, 20 years of incredible research, and we looked at the movement, the estuary use, the habitat use, the seasonal distributions of 5 of the most targeted estuary-dependent species that have been studied in multiple estuaries using acoustic telemetry. And the objectives was to really gain information on, as I mentioned, area use, seasonal distribution, everything associated with the movements of the animals, and how these could be used to better manage them, all these estuary species. And all these students that you see here were involved, are pictured alongside the fish species that were studied. From an economic perspective, the aim was to really collect, analyze, and present key estimates of provisional and cultural ecosystem services. And this was done through an extensive literature review, which was done by Sipesihle Boy, who's pictured down on the right, And she did this as part of her master's thesis, which was which has been published already, as well as a survey on, they were interviewing users of the recreationally dominated Sundays estuary and the subsistence dominated Swartkops estuaries. What was quite nice about COVID, which was never really that nice, but what was nice about it is that this work was meant to be done down in the Western Cape in the Breda. But because of COVID restrictions and travel restrictions, we had to rein it in and bring it back down to Algoa Bay, which is actually brilliant because now there's so much more known about the user groups of each of these estuaries. From a social perspective, this was really a multi-method approach was taken to interview people on that use and visit the estuaries, the Swartkops and the Sundays estuaries as well. And this was done through various things, like stakeholder workshops, interviews. There was art-based participatory research where some of the users actually collaborated with the researchers and created this most amazing art. They even had an art exhibition. So there were all these various engagements that led into the social aspect of the project. And the aim was to collate in-depth research, knowledge stories, and lived experiences of the estuarine users, as well as the uses, as well as the social and cultural benefits of these estuarine ecosystems. It was really recognized that not only anglers or fishers are making use of these systems, but these environments are being used for so many more purposes and reasons that we may not necessarily have been aware of. In addition to the three components that I've mentioned, we also looked at the current management situation of estuaries, and again, several setups, several workshops and interviews with various stakeholder groups were set up, and it was to really try and understand the constraints and enablers of current estuary management. So what is preventing appropriate management or management from happening, and how can we try and enable that? And the key question that was presented to all participants was, what are your experiences, insights, and challenges in maintaining South African estuaries in general, but also the estuarine fisheries? In terms of results, the species composition and area use really differed between the species and also between the estuaries. There was no one size fits all. There was also highlighted use of the estuaries by adults, which was very done by Vuyo for her Leofus work, but these areas are not only important for juveniles, but also adults to varying degrees. While in the estuary, these fish remain relatively resident, and they also undertake these predictable movements, either moving upstream with the incoming tide, downstream with the outgoing tide, moving downstream during the cooler winter periods and upstream during summer. So they have all these predictable movements which make them far more vulnerable to capture by fishermen because they know these things. They follow the fish themselves. There's also increased pressure in these estuarine systems because they are so easily accessible, and there is available infrastructure throughout. So you can go down, there is a jetty, you can put your boat on the water. There's several, a slipway, the jetties that you can access, that you can fish off of. So there are exceptionally accessible areas. And the fish that are caught often tend to be below the legal size limit. So they are highly exploited and smaller fish are being caught. But the ultimate goal, the ultimate outcome of all of this work was that, as I mentioned, a one size fits all approach does not work yet, will not work, because each of the fish does quite different things within an estuary, but you can have white steenbras in one estuary that does something very different to white steenbras in another estuary. So the regulations for each of these estuaries should ideally be tailor-made separately. From an economic perspective, the user groups varied quite differently between the two estuaries, as well as the uses of the estuaries. But what is important to note is that there's significant income generation between these two estuaries, with each of the estuaries bringing in about 11 million rand per annum. The estuaries really provided monetary and non-monetary benefits, and the economic valuation estimates that were produced from this work provided reliable examples of economic benefits of keeping the estuaries intact and preserving them. From a social perspective, estuaries are these complex socio-ecological systems that need to incorporate different knowledge systems. So not only your scientific knowledge, we're talking about practical, local, and indigenous knowledge. All of that should be brought in because the users make use of these estuaries in very different ways, and that should be accounted for. Users varied quite significantly across the board, from your local residents to commercial users to tourists, and your uses also range from cultural heritage to spiritual and religious reasons, even historical. And through this work, there were several constraints and enablers that were also identified to estuarine management. And again, that these alternative knowledge systems should be incorporated. The project really contributes to several milestones of South Africa's National Development Plan 2030. And through all this work, we identified key areas that need to be addressed to improve management of the estuaries and the fish and the resources that are occurring in them. And these include 13 levers for change. Not all of them are listed here, but these are just some of them, which looks at things like increased capacity to govern, effective governance, institutional functioning, and so on and so forth. The project also created these list of recommendations that could either be actionable, like today, we can make a change today, or unachievable given the current management situation for adaptive estuarine fisheries management. These are all knowledge-based and interdisciplinary. So what we did was develop the recommendation. Each recommendation had a rationale for why that recommendation was put forward. And then each of them was linked to an overarching theme, which are the ones that you can currently see on your screen. So there was some real thought that has gone into this, and the full report probably has about 12 pages of these recommendations, so it is quite extensive. But in the executive summary, we've really put forward the main points that we hope, or the main recommendations that we hope could be, will be uptaken by management authorities. So in conclusion, the estuarine fisheries management cannot be managed in isolation. We've done the fish stuff. We did 20 years of that. Nothing to really change that much. But by hopefully bringing in and incorporating this really important and often overlooked area of economics and the social side of things, you can really gain a better understanding of the entire system as a whole. I'm a fish person. If I wanted to study people, I would have done something else, but no managing people, no managing fish. So understanding what the people are doing is really, really important. And finally, the estuaries should be co-managed as socio-ecological systems that have critical linkages, not only within the estuary, but from catchment all the way down to the coast. In acknowledgement, there are so many people to thank on this project. And again, in the report, there's an entire A4 page with really small font that acknowledges everybody that's been involved in the project, especially the fish side of things for the last 20 years. This is a picture of the project team when we were in Norway last year, putting the report together. And that ends the formal official part of the presentation. Now onto the cool fun part, because we always have to share what we do when we go elsewhere. So we're very fortunate to stay at this beautiful hotel in, and I'm probably pronouncing it right incorrectly, Holmenkollen Park. It was really a room with a view, because that was the view that we had at the top of the hill. So it overlooked the fjord. It was absolutely stunning. And if you go to Oslo and Norway, you think cold, wet, rainy. We had the most perfect weather the entire time we were there. It was amazing. So we're exceptionally lucky. This was the four of us that flew from South Africa on the same day. So it's myself, then Professor Sidon Mishi, who's based at NMU, and then two of the students on the project, Loyola. Nonyane is part of the social team, and then Sipesihle Boye was part of the economic team. So it was very nice to have them there with us as well. Then we went exploring, because the conference, believe it or not, was one day. So we were meant to meet with a Norwegian collaborator, but unfortunately it didn't work out. So we were there and we thought, let's go see. And it was actually quite nice, because often you go to conferences or overseas trips and you don't get these opportunities. So it was actually really, really nice. But I found my own version of the Iron Throne, except it was skis. We went troll hunting, not this kind, but this kind. So we found this amazing, cool troll statue. Some interesting bypasses that we had to get through, but all exceptionally safe and amazing. We visited this very cool ski park. I don't know if anybody knows like a ski jumping. If you've ever watched Eddie the Eagle, it's this movie or this whole story about this guy who does the ski jumping, but this site down in the bottom left was actually an Olympic ski jump stadium. So it was a pretty phenomenal structure up close because we were kind of on it, and then also from away from it. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. And these ski jumpers can soar through the air for like more than 200 meters. So it was pretty impressive. No ski jumping happening obviously now because there's no snow. And then just some really beautiful sights and sceneries. There was a really very dark black Gothic looking church, but it was stunning anyway. Beautiful architecture, and then also these little cabins just dotted around everywhere. We went to the Natural History Museum, and of course the only thing I took pictures of were all the cool fishy things. So they had the most stunning little dioramas that were for each of the kind of ecosystems that you found fish in, and then all these amazing fish fossils, including some cool stingrays and a coelacanth as well. Then we went to the Norwegian Museum of Cultural History. We jumped on a ferry, which is on the top left, and we just potted across the fjord to the other side. And it was an open air museum that has 190 different buildings. So it's essentially like an area that has houses through the time of Norway, and it's got history from like the 1300s to present. So it's quite an exceptional thing to see, and you can actually go into some of the houses, like in the top right, you can go into those houses and go, oh, this is what people used to live like. I know it sounds boring, it was actually really cool. And then yeah, some really amazing cabins with giant logs. You just go, how did these people do this? This is just mind-blowing. And again, just a stunning church, which was kind of right up on top of a hill in the center of this museum. To show that we actually gave presentation, there I am giving a presentation, but I don't know where Sia is. I think she was taking photos just now. Please make sure there are better ones than that or that. Clearly I'm incapable of getting a good presentation photo, so I don't know if it's enthusiastic and facial expressions, but yes, it all happened and it was very well received. There's potential collaborations coming out of it on things like pharmaceutical traces in estuaries. So you never know where these things will take you. We jumped down to the Oslo city centre, which was quite different to the top part where we were. We visited this sculpture park, which is the wonderful world of Gustav Vigeland, I think you say it, and just over 200 sculptures that are visited by people worldwide. For some reason, this little bugger here is one of the most famous sculptures. It's called the Angry Boy. So pretty much a tantruming toddler over there, and also just stunning stonework, some really cool old buildings. Who knows what this is? The Scream. Okay, so that was the Scream, the general feeling postgraduates get during their studies. But we visited the Monk Museum. They had spent apparently millions of kroner on setting up this museum, and it's got humidifiers and all sorts of fancy things within it. But we found some really cool pictures. I think that was the maiden with the wicker chair. This was called In a Man's World. So I had to take a photo of that because I thought that was pretty apt. And then there were really cool little things, like there would be a table with a little hole in it and little footprints, and you kind of look through this hole. And they'd set up these tiny little mice in these places. So it was very kid appropriate as well. I took them to show my children. So it was just a really, really nice, culturally rich experience. And then I think this might be the last one, but to top it off, we went to this restaurant, which was probably the best meal of my whole entire life so far. It was absolutely mind-blowing. So our Norwegian collaborator, Tur Nasha, took us over here. And it was just mind-blowing, all local produce from the area. It was top class. Yeah, the brilliant Sand Ocean team that was there. We were also joined by Tur, who we've been working with for 20 years. He's the tall guy. The guy next to him is Dr. Oddguy Anderson, who also works for Nina from the economic side of things. And then we're also joined by Mia Strand, who is one of the PhDs on the social side of the project. She also submitted her thesis recently. So yeah, just really excellent bunch of people to be with. And on that note, tschüss and tak. Well, thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Taryn. I must say that tangerine toddler sculpture hits close to home. Yeah, I think this is an excellent example of a highly innovative and impactful piece of work. So congratulations to the entire team on the work. It's also a great motivation for getting involved in these long-term projects, and you can see the impact that they can have. So now we'll be taking some questions. I think Lucky has been collating the questions from our online viewers. I'll start with questions in-house and then we will move to the online questions. So yeah, anybody in-house at SAIAB with questions? Warren?
Taryn, thanks very much. It looks like an amazing project. And I was thinking when you said that there were 12 pages of recommendations, I was thinking about how are you going to, because it's really the next step that is the difficulty. You can make as many recommendations as you want, but how do we get those to actually become reality? Have you got any, did they have any plans for the next step, or was it the end of the project and the next step was reliant on the authorities to read the report?
Yeah.
Or what was going to happen?
So the idea was to distribute the report. So you got the full report. We also created a short executive summary that kind of smashed everything into 10 pages, which is still quite extensive in its own. The idea for each of the work packages which were presented was to kind of give the intro to it and then the main findings. And then at the end, there were 2 pages of recommendations directed at varying levels of government. So it was like national, provincial, local. So they were going to be distributed to varying bodies along with the executive summary, which has also been translated into Afrikaans, isiXhosa, and isiZulu. But beyond that, I'm not entirely sure. So this last phase is now closed. The project is now completely over. There's potentially another 5th phase, which could be coming up. And this could be an opportunity to really try and drive home these recommendations. Because we've got all the information, we've got all the research, but the next step. So I think it's just to really try and not simplify them, but just to make it easy to understand and to stress the importance of certain things that could hopefully feed in somehow. Yeah, beyond that, I don't have an answer for you. If you have suggestions, it'd be great.
Thanks, Warren.
I'll chat later.
Any other questions in-house?
From Warren's question, is there, I'll check on there, is there any plan to maybe draft a policy, like a short form policy based on the recommendations? If there is, then perhaps, you could reach out to the relevant authorities, someone within government who is responsible for estuaries and fisheries, and then talk to them in terms of drafting a short based on those recommendations. Is there a plan of that nature of environment?
Yeah, there's no plans at the moment, but I think if you're going to draft something like a policy document, it would be really valuable to sit down with the managers themselves and to work together, as opposed to just coming from us, because then we're just going top down again.
Yeah.
And to also sit with some of the local guys that are on the ground and are directly affected by these changes in regulations. So it would be nice to kind of rope in key players that what we really wanted to, what we put forward was to identify champions in each of these areas who could really drive home, not drive home the recommendations, but to really get buy-in from community members to try and promote more sustainable use of fisheries. So if you're going to draft something like that, it would be really nice to have these key players all involved to create a document like that, instead of just going, here we go, here it is. So no plans at the moment, but that is a good suggestion. I like that. Thank you.
Cliff.
So I was very glad in the time I wasn't going to come, and I'm so glad that I actually did, because I'm actually part of a consortium. We have got the funding yet. It's a socio-economic project that's going to look at all aspects of socio-economics. The emphasis is on governance, but not just fisheries, but it's fisheries integral part of it. But it's looking at the entire catchment from the catchments on the coast, but all aspects of land use and socio, and linking it or basically linking it to governance. And one of the case studies is going to be the SWAT course, and then there's one in the Western Cape and one in town. So it's just come and find out more of what you did in more detail, because I think there's not necessarily with my own work, but with other people that are in the project. I think there's a massive synergy.
Yeah, for sure.
So you can maybe use a lot of what you've done.
Perfect. I'm happy to send you the report. So if you want, it's extensive.
And you,
It's 122 pages, but it's,
and the report.
yeah.
Thanks, Cliff. One more in-house. I'm just watching time. Then I'll move to the online questions. No takers. Okay. Start with Q&A. Okay. That's the first one from Matthew Dooley. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Greetings, Taryn. A member from the Wild Bird Foundation, visits the sedge field quite often, and has noticed extensive estuarine mouth manipulation. Mouth is opened every year using earth moving equipment. Does this impact estuaries and fish mentioned in your presentation, and have these impacts been studied?
Who's it?
Matthew Dooley.
Hey, Matt, thanks for your question. So every now and again, a couple of estuary mouths are breached artificially, but it's generally linked to if lower lying areas or houses are being flooded and there's potential property damage. That is my understanding. Amber Moran, chip in if I get this incorrect. So that is my understanding with excavators. There are a couple of estuaries. Which is the one in Sedgefield? Toe estuary.
Yeah.
Toe, yeah, or toe, hey. I think the toe is the one that gets breached quite often. If it opens, there will probably be recruitment of fish back into the system. It's more if they get trapped there and then the environmental parameters are not necessarily suited to those fish species, which might see them die off. Not altogether, but there will always be some that kind of swim around and do their thing. But it's good and bad, because you've got fish going back out to sea, you've got fish coming back in. But I think these artificial breaches are linked more to like people needs. There's issues, or not issues, but there's what's the word I'm looking for? It's mostly linked to property damage or those kind of things. So we haven't actually studied the impacts, but there's been quite a lot of work done on the West Plainies. That is a temporary open closed estuary. Hopefully we're going to do some more work there, and it would be really interesting because was the West artificially breached? Was the West? The West, for example, West Clanamunda, which is near Port Alfred, was artificially breached now recently because there was a huge sea that came prior to massive rains. So you had seawater influx and then fresh water coming down from the top, which kind of flooded a lot of the low-lying places, and they had to artificially breach the mouth. And it would have been really cool to have a little telemetry project there and to see what the fish were doing, because I think they recruited in with the sea and then went back out again with the fresh water. But no, in short, no, we haven't studied the impacts on that at all.
I think email you for Anna's book because there's some information in there.
Oh, yeah. Matt, if you
On
haven't,
on this exact case study.
Yes.
some information
Oh,
from
yes.
Alan.
if you haven't seen Alan Whitfield's and co-author's new book on the Nice and Estuary, it's Jewel of the. not
The
Nice,
Disagena-
Oh, the fish one. Oh, okay. Yes, there's some information. So Matt, if you would like to email me, get hold of Lucky, I suppose he's got your email address, and we can get electronic copy of a book to you, which will have some information in there.
Thanks, Taryn and Matthew, for the question. Chantal, one of our colleagues, is asking about policy uptake. I think we've addressed that
Yeah.
sufficiently.
Chantal, if we haven't, just drop a comment.
Matthew Daly relating to the angry boy on a Monday morning. Luckily, it's not Monday today. Professor James says, thanks, Taryn, for an amazing talk. Do you know when the fishery data from the 2 estuaries will be published or publicly available?
We're working on it next. A lot of it has been published already. So a lot of the older work that's been done, which really formed, bulk components of Amber and Rhett's master's and PhD thesis, my theses, Weir's theses. All of the theses are available, and they should be available at the various universities that they're registered with their thesis repositories. But in terms of the publications, there's still a lot that needs to come out and a lot that needs to be done. But so yes and no. We've got all the information, just get hold of us.
Okay, that concludes the questions. If anybody would like a certificate of attendance, kindly email Lucky with that request. Thank you very much to Taryn for sharing the story with us this morning. And to Lucky Ambasile and his team for hosting these great events, and for everybody attending both in-house and online. Welcome, and thanks for coming. And keep your eyes out for the next seminar in the series. Do we have a date for that yet?
The 2nd of November.
2nd of November. Yeah. Thank you, and get back to work.